It's 9:05 on Wednesday, March the 2nd. The House Criminal Justice Subcommittee is now in session. Madam Clerk, please take the roll. I got you, Bill.
Representatives Beck, Curcio, Farmer, Griffey, Hardaway, Howell, Lamberth, Moody, Russell, Sexton, Chairman Doggett.
Present.
Chairman Doggett, you have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, do we have any personal orders before we begin today's session? Leader Lamberth.
Mr. Chairman, more of a housekeeping question. I noticed on the materials that your staff sent out that there are quite a few witnesses on the first bill. If there are members here that are on other bills, do you anticipate it will take a large amount of time on the first bill, Mr. Chairman?
I do anticipate that. I was going to address that here shortly, but
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whenever you're ready to address it, I saw a few members kind of come in and I was confident you probably address them, but I will stop at this juncture addressing them and say that I merely support you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the job you do.
Thank you very much. Any other members have personal orders before we begin? I will take this point to recognize a couple gentlemen from the West Tennessee Judicial Violent Crime and Drug Task Force that is with us today. We appreciate your service to our state and our communities. Thank you for being with us. Mr. Tyler Muniz, Sergeant of Arms, has our daily words of wisdom.
Yes, thank you very much. Today's words of wisdom come to you from Chief Trotter himself. Have a good day, and if you can't, don't go messing up someone else's.
Very good. For the members of the committee, this first bill that we're going to take up this morning, we have a large number of people that would like to testify on this, and we are going to do so. The format in which we are looking at when we get to this point in the bill is we're going to have members, or we're going to call up panels, as we've done in the past, that will come up. They'll have an opportunity to give their testimony. And then once they do, I'm going to ask that you take notes if you have questions when you hear something or you think of something, to make notes. And once the panel has completed their comments, you will have an opportunity then to be recognized to ask questions. Also, for members that have bills that are calendared for today in this committee, I encourage you to watch from afar if that's what you would like to do, and see if, as we get to you, then you can come back. But I expect that we will have a vast majority of our time today will be on House Bill 1944. So without further ado, we will call up the first bill, House Bill 1944 by Representative Sapicki. You have a motion and a second. You're recognized. There is an amendment, code 13752. Mr. Spickey.
Mr. Chairman, I will be requesting a roll call vote on all votes on this bill in all circumstances.
Thank you. A roll call vote has been requested.
We're working off Amendment 013752 as we did from last week, Mr. Chairman.
Very well. You are recognized on the amendment. Would you like to explain the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So what this does is it addresses a exception in Section 39 about the possession of obscene or pornographic material that was currently exempted from our K through 12 systems. This would remove that exemption, and it would also apply to our K through 12 systems for the possession of pornographic or obscene materials for the point of distribution or to show minors. It also, in regards to that, there's been much consternation in the public about things that have appeared in our libraries to be consumed by our children and read by our children. And what this part does from Section 2 on down, it talks about creating a process. And the process is there for one specific reason: to prevent any arbitrary removal of any book from any school library. I want to say that again: to prevent any arbitrary removal of any book from any school library. It's a process that we need to create that makes sure that if a parent or a student or a teacher has an issue with a book that shows up in one of our school libraries, that we will have a process a skeletal process that the locals will fill in from the local level on how to take care of a situation that a book or a text has been challenged. Basically, the book will be removed for 30 days to give the school board the opportunity to weigh in on whether that meets the challenge of an obscene, pornographic, or age-level inappropriate script. People have asked me why the school board. Well, if you look at the Miller test, community standards, what a reasonable person would deem. I can't think, and we can't think of anybody better who would represent the community standards than the school board of that local LEA, who are elected by the people to represent their views and what they believe are their standards in those communities. It has a reporting mechanism of any book that is removed from a school library to be reported to the Department of Education to make sure that they can track those. And then it has a compliance measure that every LEA, if this bill passes, will have to comply with this section of law. Mr. Chairman, I know we have a lengthy list. It does make the bill if the committee wants to go ahead and put it on the bill and get it in the proper position for possibly a vote later on.
Thank you. Question has been called, seconded. We'll now be voting on adding Amendment 13752 on the House Bill 1944. Ms. Clerk, take the roll.
Representative Beck? Yes. Curcio? Farmer? Yes. Griffey? Hardaway? Yes. Howell? Yes. Lamberth? Yes. Moody? Yes. Russell? Yes. Sexton? Yes. Chairman Doggett?
Yes.
We have 9 ayes, 2 present, not voting.
Thank you. We adopt. We're now on House Bill 1944 as amended. Do you wish to, at this time, we take up testimony?
Yes, sir.
Okay, without objection, we'll go out of session. The first 3 on our list will be Victoria Jackson, Elizabeth Story, and Jennifer Hamlin. And I want to go ahead and apologize on the front end. If I do mispronounce your name, please accept my apologies. There you go.
Should I start?
Ms. Jackson, you'll be first here. You'll have 4 minutes, if you would. Identify yourself for the record, and then you'll have 4 minutes for your comments. Members, I'll remind you again, after these 3 panelists are through with their testimony, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions or make comments. Ms. Jackson.
Thank you for listening. My name is Victoria Jackson. I moved here 10 years ago to be with my grandchildren. I thought this was the Bible Belt. I soon found out there was pornography, obscenity, and profanity in our school libraries and some textbooks. And I thought, why would that be in the Bible Belt? So I used my critical thinking skills, which was mentioned last week. And they started when I was 6, and I learned the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And 1 Peter 1 said, be holy as I am holy, God said. So I started thinking. Then I used my critical thinking skills from Palm Beach Atlantic, Florida Bible College, Furman, Auburn, and most recently Lipscomb, where I got my master's. And I concluded that there's 2 reasons. One is we're in a spiritual battle, Ephesians 6:12. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. And number 2, the Communist Party USA, their goals are happening. They had goals that were read in 1963 by Democrat Albert Herlong in the Congress. Here's some of their goals that are coming true. Get control of the Schools and Teachers Association, soften curriculum, gain control of student newspapers, eliminate laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity, present homosexuality sexuality, degeneracy, promiscuity as normal, natural, healthy. Eliminate prayer. Discredit the founding fathers. Belittle American culture. Discourage American history teaching. Discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of their parents. These are the Communist Party USA goals, and you can Google that. So I thought, well, that's why it's happening. And then I thought, critical thinking. Has porn or obscenity ever made a nation, a culture, or a soul better? No. It has only made it worse. And criminals, as that mother testified last week, say porn was their gateway into becoming a criminal, a deviant, a rapist, and a murderer. I like to quickly read some of the things an 11-year-old can read at their library. The Lovely Bones. Mr. Harvey, I really have to get home. Take off your clothes. What? Take your clothes off, Mr. Harvey said. I want to check that you're still a virgin. I am, Mr. Harvey. I said, I want to make sure. Your parents will thank me. My parents? They only want good girls, he said. Mr. Harvey, I said, please let me leave. You aren't leaving, Susie. You're mine now. As he kissed his wet lips down my face and neck, then began to shove his hands up under my skirt, I wept. I began to leave my body. I began to inhabit the air and the silence. I wept and struggled so I would not feel. He ripped open my something, not having found the invisible zipper my mother had sewn in big white panties, he said. My father protected me from this. I only saw G movies. We didn't have a TV. My father protected my innocence. And this is the issue that hurts me more than any issue in our culture. People are stealing the innocence of children. My innocence was never stolen. That's why I am the way I am. I've never had it stolen. Here's some other books. Is she fucking all of them? Page 251. Daryl, didn't you fuck my sister? Fucking pussy. Man, fuck you, then dumb bitch. That bitch is out like a fucking turkey. Blah, blah, blah. There's over 100 books. I don't even talk like this. And there's a mother who couldn't be here named Marissa. And she used to be the room mom who made muffins. And she said now she spends all of her time researching porn in school libraries. Thank you for listening. Oh, there's a lot more porn. And I left Emily a bunch of these sheets, because, I'm a grandma. I don't hang out at the schools that much. So if you want to see proof, it's right here.
Thank you. Next on our list, Ms. Elizabeth Story. You'll have 4 minutes, please, as others, announce yourself for the record.
Okay. Is this on? Can you hear me now?
There's a button. It looks like someone's talking.
There it is.
You go.
The sticker's peeled off. In my defense, I can read on and off. Thank you, Chairman Doggett and committee, for allowing us to speak here today. And I hope that everyone will truly consider our testimony. I want to start off by saying that this is not a partisan issue. This is an issue of protecting our children in public schools. Arguing to keep pornography in schools is an absolutely indefensible position, which I will demonstrate by addressing some of the points that we have heard so far. I'd like to bring up critical thinking again because we spent so much time on it last week. Access to pornography does not improve critical thinking skills. Ingesting pornography has been scientifically shown to have catastrophic effects on the brain, interpersonal relationships, emotional health, and familial structure. Pornography addiction is a $17 billion a year problem in the U.S., not including lost productivity. Pornography involves minors in a major way, and it's a major draw for human trafficking. Each day in the U.S., there are about 200,000 searches for child porn involving minors. There's absolutely no tie-in between accessing pornography and critical thinking skills that would ever benefit our children. We heard that passing this bill would jeopardize other books. That is patently false. HB 1944 applies only to obscene content, which is very clearly spelled out in the language of the bill if one reads it. If a book does not have obscene content, it is not in danger, period. The bill defines a review process. Books would not be arbitrarily removed from a school library on a whim. Furthermore, clearing out obscene books will make more room for books that do have quality content and educational value for our students. We heard about the notion of government overreach. Well, that's pretty hilarious since schools are government-funded institutions that are funded by, in fact, the taxpayer. There are rules and guidelines for teachers, staff, and students. Even as a parent, I cannot volunteer without a background check and fingerprinting. All we're asking for is a little background check on the books that you're giving to our minor children. That's all we want. I heard some ridiculous statements like, just homeschool your kids if you don't like it. Well, let me allow you to read you Tennessee State Constitution, Article 11, Section 12, that states, the state of Tennessee recognizes the inherent value of education and encourages its support. The General Assembly shall provide for the maintenance, support, and eligibility standards of a system of free public schools. We are here today to ask the General Assembly to perform a maintenance function by putting in guardrails in place to protect our minor children as young as elementary school and their school libraries that are funded at taxpayer and constituent expense. A librarian stood up and said that a kid having a single-parent home that uses drugs might interpret obscenity different than a kid in a healthy home environment. Not only is that demeaning, but it's absolutely absurd. The student in the single-parent home needs access to quality reading materials even more than a student in a healthy home environment because they're already in jeopardy. The definition of obscene does not change because a minor has been desensitized. I want to use that word again, desensitized. Never in history should a school-funded library play a role in desensitizing minors by providing them porn at a taxpayer's expense. Every member of this committee has stated that they are a man of faith in their bio. It is better to fear the wrath of the Lord than to fear being called names and nonsense that I know you're going to hear pretty soon. I'd like to, in closing, read two passages from the Bible. Luke 17:2. It would be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and to be thrown into the sea than to cause one of these little ones to stumble. 1 Corinthians 8:12. By sinning against your brother in this way and wounding their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. You need not worry about name calling. You need to protect our little ones. Please be a hero for all the kids of Tennessee. Perform your maintenance function and vote yes on HB 1944.
Thank you. Next on our list, Jennifer Hamlin.
Thank you, Chairman Doggett. Thank you, members of the committee. It is impossible to share what needs to be shared with you in 4 minutes, but I'm grateful for it, so let's roll. I'm not going to belittle you. I'm not going to give you an education lesson. I'm not going to talk about who you are or what you are. I'm going to give you the facts. Being a former Tennessee school board member like you, there's days that we have things brought before us that's really tough to tackle. Unbelievable that we're having to tackle this. When I started being called by parents of what was going on, I took a deeper dive. This is not about librarians letting it happen or schools letting it happen because a lot of you guys were not even aware it was happening. When I went to my own county commission and asked them why they were funding porn, they said, we're not funding porn. Yes, you are. Here's the books in our county library. What's sad about this is everyone in our school system currently has a get-out-of-jail-free card. Why? Because some of these most hideous books are on our approved Tennessee School Department of Ed approval rating. Me or on the dying girl. We had a representative last week that said he didn't need to read it. Here's the proof that it's on our approved reading list. So just let me give you a taste of what you might want to read. Yeah, Earl, I'm going to eat her pussy. Hey, yeah, do you even know how to eat pussy? Really? Papa Gaines never set you down, son. Said one day you're going to have to eat pussy. But no, he did not teach me how to eat pussy. He taught me how to eat butthole. Who wants their kids to see this at school? This is not about he said, she said. This is already illegal. It doesn't matter who censors the books. It doesn't matter who looks at it. It's already illegal. The next book, Genderqueer. It's on our approved reading list. Do you want to see your child going to school learning how to give a blowjob? Learning how to do oral sex? It's there. It's there. Do you want to teach your teenager how to give himself masturbation lessons driving down the road? Should be no debate here. There should be no name calling here. There should be, this is it. We serve God, we serve family, we serve country in that order, and it's not up for debate. And Representative Hardaway, your book of critical thinking is right here, the Holy Bible.
Thank you. We're now going to take questions and comments from the committee. Representative Hardaway, you are first on the list.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, ladies, for coming. Though we're on the same planet, it seems like we're worlds apart when it comes to how we address the issues at hand. Now, I don't need instructions from anyone in this room about how to go about my faith. Let's get that straight, number one. And number two, we had discussions about critical thinking and how important it is for those who are attending any public school or private school to be able to go out into the world for a lifetime using the skills that they have garnered from K-12 or post-secondary education. Critical thinking is part of that. My dad was an educator. He was both an administrator and a classroom instructor. My mom was an educator, classroom instructor. Believe it or not, I did substitute teaching, and I am one of the visionaries and founders of the first charter school to open its doors in the state of Tennessee. So I don't need a lecture on what I need to do in terms of understanding how to approach education. Now, we can disagree about how we approach and reach our hope, what we would consider to be mutual end results. And that's a well-educated child that's able to think for him or herself and become a productive citizen in America. So I want to get that out so we can begin the debate. But nobody in here can lecture me on my faith. It's as strong as yours or stronger. I don't question yours. I don't expect you to question mine. I learned to read. My initial reading skills were developed reading the Bible. So I don't need that lecture. Back to the debate. The reason, and ma'am, I apologize, I don't know your name, but yes, ma'am.
Elizabeth.
Miss Elizabeth,
Yes.
you spoke to the critical thinking debate. And it's not real complicated. It's more or less what I've just described. Wouldn't you agree?
I think that critical thinking skills would have me put my Bible verse next to the pornography and make a choice that I'm going to follow the Bible and remove the pornography.
All right, now, the problem I have with that, and when I ran for office, the very first thing that I put out on my literature and on my Facebook page and all the rest of my social media was who I am and what kind of leadership I would provide. Principle-based, spiritually guided, people-oriented leadership with measurable results. So once again, I use my faith for basic principles to give me guidance. But when we talk about whether we're talking about the Quran or the Bible, as intelligent as we are as a race, we lack the divine knowledge because it's interpreted through our poor mortal brains. I think you would agree with me on that. And that simply means that everything is open to interpretation in the Bible. We hope that as a biblical scholar...
Are you
that
defending porn? Are you defending porn?
Excuse
Mr. Chairman,
me.
I have the mic.
Representative Hardaway, let me stop you. I hate to break your thought there for a second, but we need to before anybody speaks, we need to come through the chair, just so that we don't have wild dialogue going back and forth, okay? So I apologize for not stating that earlier, but that's how we need to operate. All right, Representative Hardaway, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I intend to have a civil debate on this.
Yes, sir.
No matter how difficult it may be. I know there's some emotions involved, but for me, it's not personal. It's not personal. But when I speak to the need for interpretation of the Bible, unless there's somebody in here who helped to write those books, then that's all you're doing is interpreting the Bible. We have leadership. We call them bishops. We call them priests. We call them rabbis who help us to interpret the Bible. So anyone that thinks that they can read the Bible and get a literal meaning that matches the rest of the world, you're delusional in my estimation. We all interpret the Bible. Now, that brings me back to the point of why we need to have material, and I'm not an advocate for pornography, okay? When I told the gentleman last week I didn't need his instruction on what books to read, I meant it. And with all due respect, ma'am, I don't need instruction today, okay? So this is where parents and responsible adults come in. Parents, responsible adults, whether they're in the household or whether they're in the educational system, are there to help children to learn how to learn. They're there to help children interpret what's good and what's bad. Now, after it's all said and done, these books that are in the library, whether they're there or not, they will be available at some point to your child. Do you want your child to be out there in the wonderful streets of the internet interpreting with themselves and their buddies, or do you, as a parent, as a responsible adult, want to give guidance to what's good, what's bad, what's real, what's fantasy? That's, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to belabor these points, so I'm going to relinquish my time. But thank you, ladies, for being here, and thank you for representing your positions, because that's what it's all about. Government of the people, for the people, by the people.
Thank you, Representative Hardaway. Ms. Jackson, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I was wondering what Bible verse you interpret saying that parents should show their kids porn so that they can help their critical thinking. What Bible verse are you? And what is your rabbi or your whatever interpret? What you don't even make any sense.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Chairman. As I said, it's my intention to have a civil debate. And to do that, I have to stick to one of my truisms that I've lived by ever since I've been in public office. I don't engage foolishness.
You're not
Thank you, sir.
answering the question.
Chairman Doggett, may I answer the question? And I'll try to go fast. I know we're running short on time.
You may, yes.
Yeah.
Briefly, please.
It was sort of kind of, Representative Hardaway, I appreciate your comments, and I've been waiting to tell you something since last week, and it was kind of a three-part statement, and I'll give you a very fast three-part answer. After the meeting last week, several of the people that showed up to support your bill, a large group of people that showed up to support you, came up to our group and asked to see the material in question. And one of the women said, and I quote, "I'm from a rough neighborhood, I grew up in a rough neighborhood, and let me tell you, not much shocks me, but this shocks me." That was your constituent and your supporter who showed up to support you. So I think the issue at hand, I think most parents who have not seen this material cannot really grasp the depth of it until they see it. And You know what I mean? And you said that this isn't a personal issue for you. Well, I must admit this is a personal issue for me because I have kids in elementary and middle school who have already been affected by this. And as a parent, it is my job to protect them. And it's the General Assembly's job to make rules for the schools that they attend and that I pay for them to attend. So again, we want lots of books available to these children. We just don't want books that poison their mind because I'm not there to protect them in their school library. And just in closing, I will tell you that in order to prepare to come here today, I had to read stories of little girls as young as 10 and 11 getting gang raped or raped by their stepfathers in their own bedrooms. And I can't find a way to think that that has some educational value for my little girl, my little son, or anyone that goes to school with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate the way you approach this. First, I represent a diverse group of citizens in District 93. And that's what makes me a better, not the best, but a better legislator than I would otherwise be. Their opinions vary on this topic and others. The same way that some were here to support that bill, there were others who called me. They don't support all my legislation. So when we're talking about what I support and what I don't support, I'll refer you back to what I said about my guidance in my initial statement to you. The definition of pornography, as you know, is about written or visual or video material that's designed to excite or raise erotic feelings. That's it. Okay? I don't advocate for pornography. What I do advocate for is critical thinking. I do advocate for the lack of censorship, and that censorship that is just blanket, it's not age appropriate, it's not grade appropriate, I have problems with. I expect that government would give guidance to those entities which fall under the chartering of the state and the regulation of the state. So I agree with you there. Okay? It's just a matter for us agreeing on what that proper guidance should be at this point. The language that I walked in on, I was appalled. I've never said those words. You won't hear me say them today, publicly. I don't think that's my role as a legislator. Okay? I will speak to F-bombs or F words or something of that nature. But if we're going to be, and the lady has every right to express herself however the committee and the chairman see fit. So we have a difference in what you just said about how the community, my community, perceives my position, and it's just a micro of the state as a whole. Somebody out there, believe it or not, agrees with me. Okay? Somebody out there, and in here, obviously agree with you. That's a wonderful thing about having a republic, a democratic republic. My job is not to voice my opinion, but to use my position to seek the best possible outcome for my constituents. To do so, I gather facts. I probably have different facts than you have. You have some facts that come from your experiences and your research, the same as I do. My facts and experience lead me to a different conclusion, that there's a better way for the state to give guidance as opposed to the legislation before us. That's it. So for those who have been misled about whether I advocate or endorse pornography, that's a lie. I don't know how much clearer I can make it. I don't. And I have 3 wonderful children who have all turned out well, and they'll give you testimony to the same. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and once again, thank you, ladies.
Ms. Jackson, you have a brief comment?
Yes. HB 1944 would not do blanket book burning. It would take the book in question before the school board. Is that right?
It deals only
So
with
I don't think you
obscenity.
understand what HB, and if you do you have a better idea? And if you don't say the F word, why do you want kids to read it? But back to HB 1944, it doesn't blanket book burn. It takes a book before the school board and people discuss whether it should stay or not. That's all.
Thank you. Representative Sexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is directed to Jennifer Hamlin. When you showed the material that you showed there, what process did you take in going to the schools or the school board? Did you try to address this, and what response did you get?
Thank you for that question. Very good question. So after 2 parents had called and told me that they could not fathom that they were having to teach their 4th grader now what orgasm was and the pictures that they had seen, I started a deep dive into the schools. So being a school board member, I reached out to other school board members first to ask them were they aware these books were in their schools. I didn't find a single yes. And when I told them that I had found them in their schools, they said, no way, no how, I'll go to our director of schools. Go to the director of schools, who a lot of them really quickly went into detective mode. If those books are in our schools, get them out. And if Jennifer Hamlin calls you asking about them, we don't have them. Why would you be so afraid to admit that you found them in our schools? We found out that some schools had them because Scholastic Books, which is another scenario, but Scholastic Books gives our schools free gifts after their book fairs when they've sold X amount of points. Well, guess what books they're giving them? They're giving them these books as one of them. So I started going to principals and started going to school board members, and I got the defense. I got the school board members who were appalled, but the principals and teachers said, you can't touch us because they're on the approved reading list in Tennessee. So they can't touch them. So then a principal said, why don't you go to your state library guidance and Gale system at Trey Hargett's office and see what you find? That's more horrifying than this. Guess what? Because it's not only in our schools, it's in our local libraries, and our county commissioners are funding it. And when you ask them, so I started calling county commissioners, do you know you're funding porn? We're not funding porn. Yes, you are. Here it is. So when I had to go and read the filthy, disgusting language I had to say to you today, their mouths are still on the floor. They go to the librarians. What do the librarians do? Get defensive. You're not censoring me. You're not going to take my books away. Well, you're not censoring, you're not doing anything. This is already illegal. We don't need to be asking anybody, okay, go through this, let's see what's good, what's not. They're already illegal. We need to have the verbiage that says we don't have to worry about anyone going through it. It's illegal. So in the school system, they're sitting back, breathing, relaxing because they can't be touched, because it's on the Tennessee Department of Ed, and it's on Trey Hargett, Secretary of State's Gale system. So I took a survey of high school students. Do you guys buy Playboy, Penthouse? So we don't have to. We can go to our school site and get it for free, not get in trouble.
So in your investigation, you're saying that this is illegal. Where do you get that from?
So don't just have my opinion. So I started calling the sheriff's department. I talked to my own sheriff, and he said he didn't know whether to hug me or go start putting people in handcuffs. Talked to some friends on TBI. I called the federal level. I said, give me the definition of porn as promotion. Consistently, I talked yesterday with the former director of TBI, Mark Gwynn, who was in total shock that this is allowed in our schools. He goes, absolutely, it's pornographic. If you went outside and texted it to somebody, I could arrest you on the spot. Well, we can't arrest the teachers. We can't arrest the principals. We can't arrest the director of schools. And like Representative Hardaway say, it's up to the parents. Well, I send my child to school. I can't take care of the propaganda they're given at school because I'm not there to protect them. So we send them there as a place of safety to be taught, but not to be groomed.
So it's obvious that we have a discrepancy of what's legal and where it's legal and where it's not legal. I know I didn't know this was in the schools, and obviously a number of other people didn't. So you say that it's on the, and I forget what term
It's
that
the
you
GALE
used.
system, the GALE, our library system that is run through Secretary of State Trey Hargett's office that handles our schools and our public libraries. You do a deep enough dive into that system and do searches, our kids don't have to go by the filth. They can get on their own website, and guess what? They're protected because they're getting it through their school laptops.
Okay. I remember back in the 60s, I think it was, that prayer was deemed unconstitutional and removed from our schools. And then a little bit later, the Bible was deemed unconstitutional and removed from our schools. So do you know if the Bible is available in any of these libraries?
So the American Standard Bible is going through some of our schools, but if you go in and ask for the Holy Bible, you're not going to get it. And I can tell you my experience as a school board member, because the ACLU came into Cheatham County and says, you're not going to pray in school, you're not going to pray at meetings, you're not going to pray at sporting events, and you're not going to do ABC for that. Well, guess what happened when it was my turn to lead moment of silence at my school board meeting? I stood up and started praying, buddy. And my attorney was trying to sit me down, afraid we were going to be sued. No, God and Jesus are my bodyguards, and this will always be the only book that we should be answering to.
So, so we see that there are some discrimination about what books are put into our libraries and others that are not. And it's troubling to me that we don't have the openness to know what our children are reading. First of all, in my opinion, this has nothing to do with education. It should be left up to the parents what they deem moral or immoral to their children. And we live in America, and we should have the freedom to do that. But to have this in what seems to be snuck in to our libraries and brought in such a way that one side of a moral issue or a non-moral, whatever you want to call it, one side has been catered to and another side has been demonized. And subjects matter such as this has been catered to, and positions that I would hold to be needful are not being catered to. When I was in the 4th and 5th grade, I had the option, as every student did, to be able to memorize Bible verses. And for every number of Bible verses that you could remember, you would get a prize. And up to 100, and you would get to go to Bible camp free of charge that year. And it was strictly voluntary, but it was allowed. And so just to memorize a Bible verse is not allowed today. But to deem material that, in my opinion, and I think in most reasonable people's minds, it's unreasonable for a child to be reading material like that. That's for adults. That's not for children. So somehow the process by which that these books have gotten into our system is wrong, and there needs to be more oversight, which I think that this legislation that we're talking about brings oversight to that. So I'm through, but you could.
May I respond, please? Unfortunately, we found books of this nature in 93 of our 95 counties, from elementary to middle to high school. So I had a lady in Lawrenceburg found out about me and contacted me and made me aware of this book that her daughter brought home from 3rd grade. It's perfectly normal. Now, what's interesting about this book, look what's on the bottom, ladies and gentlemen. Parental advisory, explicit content. I had to blur out the pictures. So they're going to teach her daughter how to masturbate and what she should do and how it should make her feel. What to do if she decides she'd like to do it with a girl, or would she like to do it with a boy? What they would like to do, and then making love homosexuality style. This is not a religious affiliation issue. It's not a political issue. It's not a racial issue. It's not a I don't care what you do behind closed doors issue. It's a common sense issue, and it breaks the law. And the only law we should be concerned about first is not what our voters think, not what anyone else thinks, not what people who have different opinions think. Our nation was founded under God for a reason. And it's not to send our children off to school to be groomed to decide in third grade, do I want a boy or a girl? Do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? So when I thought I had seen it all, she sends me this book. But it's warned. So in her system, I drove down to Lawrence County, and I asked how it got in the library. They didn't even know they had it. It had been given to them by Scholastic Books in a book fair. So our librarians are just maybe not vetting what they can do. Maybe it's not their fault. Maybe it is. If I was going to put something out for someone to see, I want to make sure. This is not going to be laying on my coffee table when you come into my house for a book to read. You know, I'm still sitting here shaking that I had to say such filth to you. But I felt so strongly about it, we had to make a point. There are school board members still who are calling me just in shock that this is even existing. So I get a lot of questions. What does the governor think about this? What does the governor's office think about this? He was made aware of it last August, and we're here talking about it. Why wasn't it taken out of our schools immediately?
Thank you very much, ladies, for your comments. Leader Lameth, briefly.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, I promise I will keep it brief. But on that question, the governor has a bill specifically on this issue that will make a transparent process. It doesn't go in the direction this does. Both bills work very well together. But since you asked, yes, absolutely, I know how the governor feels about this. And he has asked us to sponsor a bill for consideration for the legislature to ensure that all of this is transparent. Because just what you mentioned, so many folks don't know what books are there. You can't have the conversation if you don't know what books are there, pro or against, whatever. But transparency is always a good thing. So knowing what books are there and having that conversation in local communities is important. Just wanted to mention, since you brought it up, ma'am, yes, ma'am, I do know, as a matter of fact, personally, that this is an important issue to him, as it is to all of us.
I didn't mean to say that it was an important issue. My comment point was, why does it take 6 months later for it to be a bigger issue? It should have been this big in August.
Thank you very much for your time and your comments. We have others here to testify. I'm going to call up Mr. Dale Walker, Mr. Tim Brown, Ms. Landon Starbuck. There are other chairs here. Would the committee want to bring up 3 more? Okay. Mr. Robbie Starbuck, Laurie Cardoza Moore, and Patty Cantor. Sit there, that's fine. We are all right, we'll start with you, Mr. Walker. You'll have 4 minutes to identify yourself for the record, and you'll have 4 minutes to make your comments.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee. My name is Pastor Dale Walker. I'm president of the Tennessee Pastors Network. I've been coming down to the Hill for about 9 years speaking about religious liberty issues. 9 years ago, I brought a group of pastors down here, and we met with then Speaker Ramsey about a book that was in the schools called The Bluest Eye. It was just as wicked and vile as what we have heard today. And it's disgusting to me, and I will speak to you respectfully as a pastor, but I am mad enough about this to spit nails, okay? We should have dealt with this issue a long time ago in this state, and I respectfully speak to you state representatives today. I know many of y'all weren't here then, but we've had a long time problem with this in this state. And I appreciate, Representative Lee, what you said last week about churches being involved in these issues. And if I may recognize with them not speaking, Chairman, I'd like to ask a few pastors to stand up that are here today. They came with you pastors to stand up. They came away from their churches. Thank you. Thank you. They came away from their churches on a Wednesday. Today is prayer meeting night in our churches. They cared enough about this issue to come to Nashville, Tennessee to speak up for the children in their churches. And we just saw a display of the most vile, wicked, lascivious material right here in our state house that our kids in our schools that are having to see. Sexually explicit, sexually charged material. I was made aware of last year that this book was in Stone Elementary School in Cumberland County by a mom that couldn't be here today. She's a hardworking mom. She sends her kids to public school thinking that they are going to be educated on how to make a living in life, not sexually indoctrinated with wicked, vile books. She's in the process of pulling her younger children out of the schools up there. We began to work in Cumberland County. We got that book out of those schools with pastors reaching out and contacting the schools. They spoke it out. I've also spoke to 2 Tennessee Department of Correction officers and give them this information on this book. And mind you, folks, this morning in this room, this very material that is being given to our kids in school libraries in the state of Tennessee is considered contraband in our state prisons. I've talked to 2 of those individuals. This wicked book, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, would not have passed the vetting process of the chaplain in the state prisons. It would not be allowed to be sent in to a individual that was in prisons. That speaks volumes that the very kids in our elementary schools are being subjected to this because a corporation wants to put this book into an elementary school. I spoke to Sheriff Clint Schrum this morning out of Grundy County. I asked him about this on the way down. I said, if I texted this information to a minor, what would happen to me? He said, you would be arrested for sexual exploitation of a minor. So if a minor in school texts over this information that was read in this wicked, vile, lascivious books this morning, if they text it over to another minor, they could be charged with sexting. So we're providing a platform in our public schools that can make criminals out of our young people. I was preaching Sunday night in a church about these very issues in Spencer, Tennessee, and a 9-year-old girl came up to my wife and I. They just had the Scholastic Book Fair at their school. She bought a book called Don't Judge Me. She comes from a Christian family that believes in traditional marriage, may I say, like our Tennessee Constitution still stands for, and she believes in traditional marriage between a man and a woman. And in that book, it talked about 2 moms. And I contacted the school. I asked him if that book was in the library. It wasn't, but yet it was sold to that 9-year-old girl in the 4th grade that had to go to her parents and her grandparents and discuss that. She was obviously troubled about that in that setting to speak up to us at that church. And Brother Jerry there, Representative Jerry, brought up about viewpoint discrimination. I wonder what would happen if we churches in the state put together a list of 50 good biblical worldview books and we introduced it to the library. Would we be accepted? I think maybe that's what we need to do. So that's my testimony as president of the Tennessee Pastors Network. It's time we deal with this issue. If we don't deal with it this year, we'll be back next year. I think all these conservatives here will be back next year. We'll work on this in our locales with our school boards. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I'm so thankful to be here. I'm thankful to God that He allowed me to be able to come here and stand. I'm thankful to have my freedom, my right to free speech. I want to say, first of all, that I'm appalled at the language that I've heard this morning. It brought tears to my eyes. And I remembered how my mother would have washed my mouth out with soap to have heard something from my mouth like that.
And I want to think about how that I have stood from some 38 years, 30, preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. I've gone 10 years out on the streets to gay pride festivals from one end of Tennessee to the other. I have seen the progression of many, many young people that are using the same language that I heard this morning. So it's beginning to be, and it has started to be very prevalent in our school system. And it's your job as your representatives to do the right thing. I'll read some Bible verses here in chapter 13 of the book of Romans. It tells us how the governments are supposed to be. It says in chapter 13, it says, let every soul be subject to the higher powers. It says, for there is no power but of God. And it says, that are powers that are ordained of God. And whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works. And I want to bring that thought out this morning. It's your job to do what's good. You should be against what's evil and what is a terror. And what is a terror is having children that are given this information, these porno things, and I saw a great percentage of students, young people, that are exposed to this type of information that become sexually aggressive. It was about 8 to 10% that they took surveys where these children became more sexually aggressive. What happens to these sexually aggressive children? They grow up, they get older, and then we see the sparks of some that, heaven forbid, many and some have been raped, and different things have happened, or molested in many other ways. Children with other children that have been raped. And I want to mention this, that teachers many times who may have used these same books to groom students that have maybe molested students. And we've seen some that have been called out on the news that have been brought into many of these things. But I have heard and seen many of these things happen in our school system with our children, and I want to testify that I have 2 boys that I've held out of school for a class called Teen Living at different times, that they have brought many of these things into the school system, and it seemed like the teacher was so despondent that wouldn't give an exact time or date that would complicate the issue of me taking my child out of school to not allow them to be exposed to this type of teaching that I forbid. I do not approve of these things, and I would hope that everyone else would be too. And I want to speak to the fact that there are poor people, poor children that say, well, we might want to be exposed to these things. There's other avenues. Young children that as the representative spoke last week, he talked about, well, what about the poor people? We are the body here is to protect people and let them grow up and be as pure as they can possibly be, and as they grow up, they can unfortunately go their direction. But thank you for your time. God bless you.
Thank you. Ma'am, identify yourself for the record, and you'll have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Laurie Cardoza-Moore. I'm the president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, but I am also here in my capacity as a member of the Tennessee Textbook and Instructional Materials Quality Commission. It is the responsibility of the Textbook Commission to review textbooks and instructional materials. When the speaker brought this book to my attention that was being used in the library, I obviously was shocked and horrified. We are seeing a growing number of textbooks and instructional materials that have questionable content. I also, as a matter is confirmed in the Bible, there has to be a cloud of 2 to 3 witnesses, and I just want to state that we, as a member of the World Council of Independent Christian Churches and a deacon in the church and receiving an honorary doctorate in theology, the Bible is interpreted through the Torah. The Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, is our foundation. The prophets and the writings testify to that truth. That's how we discern. So I just want to be very clear how we interpret the Bible. There is a standard. This legislature unanimously adopted legislation requiring textbooks to be historically accurate, unbiased, and to reflect the values of this community. This book does not fit that requirement. This bill was passed by Senator Bell and Judd Matheny back in 2015. But for some reason, we look past all of this content. But again, nobody is reviewing the library books. Nobody is reviewing the supplemental materials. The only thing that we as a commission get to review are the textbooks and the instructional materials. Supplemental and library books don't fit in that category. That has to change. Somebody has to be looking at them. I spoke to a director of schools who told me that the librarians don't have time. Scholastic comes, dumps off a stack of books, and because the librarian who has their master's degree in education looks at the Scholastic label and says, oh, this is a great book, it's Scholastic. Well, Scholastic is not the book, the publishing company we grew up with. It's changed dramatically. And you rely on our commission to give you the material. So I want to encourage you. We need to look at expanding our responsibilities as a commission to review even library books, and supplemental materials, because this is where this propaganda is coming into our children. This book, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, is not just pornographic. It's also racist and anti-Semitic. Jesse Andrews is the author of the New York Times bestselling novel, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. He has also written the feature film adaptation of his own book and entitled Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, the winner of both the Grand Jury Prize and Audience Award at the 2015 Sundance Film Festival. This book targets high school students, grades 10 through 12, undoubtedly the most emotionally and psychologically vulnerable age group. Jesse Andrews delves into the deepest corners of teenage insecurity, sexuality, jealousy, competition, anger, and the fear of death. His presentation of these moments reflect a basic understanding of adolescent psychology and behavior. This being said, I need to ask how such a book filled with a sexuality bordering on pornographic salaciousness could be found in the library of an elementary school. My team spent many hours reading reviews of this book online, all focused on the above-mentioned adolescent topics. This leads to the following analysis, which I have provided for you of this book. As a media veteran and award-winning documentarian, I am trained in the analysis of literature, its themes, language, terminology, and imagery.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, your 4 minutes are up.
I would only close by saying this book should not be in school libraries. It is outrageous, and we need to change the process to which books, supplemental materials, library books are included.
Thank you. Next, identify yourself for the record. You'll have 4 minutes.
Robbie Starbuck. And I want to say thank you, Mr. Chairman and honorable members, for your time today. I, as some of you know, am a candidate for U.S. Congress, but that's not the capacity I'm here today in. I'm a father of 3 children in Tennessee who I had to pull out of public school because of the failure of our public schools to not only protect our children, but to do right by them. And I hate that I'm here having to say that because I know everyone in this room wants us to have public schools we can send our kids to. But I thank God that we did pull our kids out of school because I know our oldest child, who's 13 now, her peers in public school have been exposed to this material. It's had developmental harm, emotional harm done to them. And the reality is about these books is that if anybody in this room transmitted those materials to a child, you would be arrested, you would be charged, you would be a sex offender. But we're allowing libraries to distribute it to children. That's inexcusable, no matter how you cut it. The other reality we need to face is the fact that if you look it up, the average age that a child is exposed to porn today is 11 years old. Tennessee can do better than that. Tennessee needs to do better than that. Our kids don't need to be exposed to content like this. Our kids need an actual education that can compete with communist China and what they're doing with their child. I guarantee you they're not pushing this garbage on their kids. They're focused on the core subject matter that is going to make them competitive on a global scale. We are not anymore. And that's why I'm here today, is to deliver somewhat of a warning. My family came from Cuba, where this same sort of thing started to creep in different social aspects. They creeped in all this different Marxist curriculum, and then eventually, when they took entirely over, they separated the parental rights from the child. They separated the children entirely and forced them into indoctrination centers. That is what is coming down the line. It may be hard to see now, but people who have had their families come from any communist country will warn you, this is how it starts. If you allow this now, it's going to become much worse later. And we need to be cognizant of the effects this is going to have for generations. Societally and religiously, all around us, the culture that binds us together, it is what will be broken by these decisions. You're not just a representative today, you are the hope of the children of Tennessee. When you vote, you're voting on the hopes of their future. So I beg you, make sure that we do something about this and we pass this bill and we protect our children here in Tennessee. And then I also, Rep. Hardaway, I do have to ask you, or rather tell you, when a mom says that they want porn taken out of schools, and your response is, and I quote, well, the problem with that is you're on the wrong side of history. There should be only one obvious response to that, and it should be, as a representative, our duty. The duty of any representative is to not just represent the people, but first of all, protect them. Most of all, the most vulnerable, our children chiefly. And I think in that statement, if it starts with that, maybe that's an error in judgment in the way you started your answer, it was something that deeply disturbed me, because I believe that all of our representatives are better than that. I believe that the concerns of these brave women who came up here should be something every representative shouldn't be partisan, should take to heart, and should say, you know what, this is not something I'm okay with, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. Because I'm sure that you would have a problem if somebody sent these images or this material to your child or grandchild. You would call the police, would you not?
During this time, we're only having testimony. There's no direct questions back and forth between the committee and our witnesses at this time. But Representative Hardaway, you will have an opportunity to respond as soon as we finish this panel of questions. Next on our list, Madam, if you would identify yourself for the record, you will have 4 minutes.
Thank you so much. My name's Landon Starbuck. I'm the founder and president of Freedom Forever, a nonprofit combating child trafficking and child exploitation in America. I'm a partner with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation and a member of the Coalition to End Sexual Exploitation. I have been working over a decade on speaking on these issues as they affect children in schools because they don't have a voice here today. In my years working alongside survivors of child trafficking and child exploitation, I can tell you that child exposure to pornography is not a matter of education theory, public perception, or parenting style. It's a matter of sexual grooming of children with measurable effects of trauma in many kids. You see, traffickers and pedophiles use pornography to groom their victims so they become desensitized to the traumatic effects of viewing porn that has on young, developing, innocent minds. It effectively weakens their resistance to abuse. It's a tool of sexual predators. So-called progressives have attempted to inject pornography into radical sex education, purporting it to be an educational resource, which should be made available to kids at their discretion, adding that it's an equity issue to boot. And this includes sexting one another, which is now identifiable as CSAM, child sexual abuse material. They're encouraging the proliferation of child sexual abuse material between peers, including using Pornhub, a porn resource, as an education for children. They're promoting Pornhub, which has a record of trafficking victims that have been in our federal courts, coming to these courts saying, I've been raped, I've been abused as a child on these platforms, and we're dealing with that. So this is being promoted in schools, and this is coming down the train. That is what the context that I'm here to offer today, is this is a test. They can repackage it any way they want, but it doesn't change these measurable detrimental effects of early exposure to sexual content, which is very well documented. If we allow sexual grooming via porn exposure to continue to be tolerated and normalized, we'll continue to see more children children abused. There is a direct connection between porn and health outcomes. As of 2020, 16 states designated porn a public health hazard. In 2017, Tennessee passed a Senate joint resolution designating it as such. The United States Human Trafficking Advisory Report this year, page 29 to 31, addressed the intersection between porn, trafficking, and child sexual exploitation. These radical sexual theories have already caused measurable harm to children, and they will only become more extreme as we allow the Overton window of acceptability to be distorted and infringed. Parents don't want their children exposed to pornographic content, nor do they want their children exposed to any sexual content from anyone without their explicit consent. No adult should be permitted to distribute pornographic content to minors, no matter if you're a stranger at a public park, a librarian at a public library, or a teacher at a public school. The location or person doesn't matter. The sexual grooming and predatory nature of it does. I'm here today to serve that public warning of what's to come if we don't put protective, common sense measures in place to protect our most vulnerable members of society, children. We'll see cases of sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, sextortion, sexual abuse at school and at home increase, as well as peer-to-peer sexual abuse increase stemming from early sexualization and grooming. And just to give you an idea, over 29.3 million reports to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, were reported. These reports include child sex trafficking, child exploitation. All of these reports have increased exponentially. The reporting of these crimes is only going to go up as this grooming continues to be allowed in our culture, in our society, in our libraries, and in our schools. I understand the real agenda behind this push, and it's a sexual rights agenda for children that's coming down the pipeline via government schools. They plan to introduce these radical comprehensive sexuality education, which they've already rolled out with other nice names, chipping away at the parental rights and pushing sexualization onto children. And the real agenda is to lower the age of consent and promote pedophilia.
Ma'am, your 4 minutes are up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am, you're recognized. You'll state your name for the record. You'll have 4 minutes.
Okay. My name is Patty Cantor, and I have the precious honor of being a mother and a grandmother, and I live here in Tennessee. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Isaiah 5:20. And becoming aware of the crisis of pornographic novels in public school libraries, I contacted the Florida Citizens Alliance. They found the school libraries throughout their state had been infiltrated with pornographic novels. From them, I obtained 44 book reviews of porn novels in their schools and found approximately 15 of those books titles in the libraries of Williamson County schools. Since then, I have found other pornographic books in our local school libraries through another list. The plots include sadomasochistic sex, a man using a knife to undress a female, bestiality, the boys ran out of the girls, so they went for the cows, a disgusting scene of a man with little girls, pedophilia, and books with various descriptions of sex scenes with teenagers. These books teach females and males to view each other as sex objects. The books also use social issues to hide in order to slide the pornography into the books. Addictions to pornography make their sales climb. As the Bible says, the love of money is the root of all evil. Goodreads.com, an internet book hub, has a section called Young Adult Fiction with Sex, with around 900 book titles, which are available for children 13 through 18. These are pornographic books, a number of which can be found in the Tennessee schools and purchased at Goodreads. The books are written many times by Goodreads authors who write sex novels that cater to youth, subverting the children's morality. Boys grow to be men who see women as disposable objects and themselves as predators, and females see themselves as victims to be sexually abused by males. From Dr. Judith Reisman's extensive research on the effects of pornography on children, she has said obscenity exemptions permit educators to assault underdeveloped brains with sexual imagery and language, which causes confusion and emotional and developmental problems. Pornography overwhelms their minds. A child's brain continues to develop until 25 years of age. Medical research has found emotional and spiritual damages from pornography, but also a child's frontal lobe of the brain will be stunted in growth when addicted to pornography. The frontal lobe is where reasoning takes place. Children become addicted to pornography much easier than adults. These are just a few of the many, many dangers of pornography. The problem of pornography in schools is a result of the most important book being taken from the hands of children. When the light of the Bible is removed, what is left is darkness and evil to fill its place. It then becomes a battle of removing that evil continuously. Removing the obscenity exemption will help in the battle to clean up the public school libraries and to help protect children's innocence and purity. Pornography is not education. There are states that have removed and are in process of removing the obscenity exemption from their law because of the resulting problems in having the exemption. So Tennessee is not the only state that has problems.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We have on Representative Sexton, you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to direct a question to Lori Cordeaux Moore. It's my understanding that you are on the textbook commission. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
Do you know of any investigation or task force that has been put together from either the school boards or school superintendents to investigate this matter once that it was found out?
I have not been informed that there is any group that is investigating. I did my own investigation and to research where this book came in, how it got into an elementary school. We know that the parent allowed an elementary student to go to a designated area in the library that has all of this questionable content. The parent agreed to let the child check out the book, and the child brought the book home. And when the parent saw the content in the book, the library book, that's when it was brought to our attention.
And I'm trying to be real brief. Where I'm trying to go with this is what has been done from the standpoint of our schools, our district attorneys, our law enforcement, because according to the testimony that I've heard today, and which I believe, I don't know, but I believe that it is against the law for this kind of material to be passed to children. And if I was to do it, especially as a state representative, I'd be run out of the state. So what I'm trying to figure out here is what has been done on the school level through the Department of Education, through our law enforcement, through our district attorney, or this state legislature has and is addressing it, thank God. But it seems to me that there should have been some kind of task force put together to go into our libraries and see what kind of materials that is being viewed by our children. But according to your understanding, you don't know of anything. Is that correct?
The only person who has done any sort of investigation is Nathan is a member of the State Board of Education when I brought this to his attention, because this library book is approved. It's on the approved State Board of Education library use in the libraries. He started an investigation. I'm still waiting to find out who approved this book being listed as an approved book, library book in the state of Tennessee, because it states on the documentation, as was shown earlier in this hearing, that this book is being used and approved by the State Board of Education here in Tennessee. This is outrageous.
Not only has an investigation not been put together, but rather it's been approved. So one other thing is I know for a fact, personally, that the ACLU has stepped in matters of this to keep certain things out. Do you know of the ACLU coming to the defense of parents on this issue, saying that this should not be put in?
No, sir.
Thank you.
I have not received any word.
Thank you very much. Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The young lady in the middle to my left, and I'm sorry, I did not write your name down.
Landon Starbuck.
Okay, Ms. Starbuck, you in your statement, you said that someone was promoting Pornhub. Who did you say was promoting Pornhub?
So United, the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, which dictates a lot of the national standards for comprehensive sexuality education, include this as part of their curriculum. And this is something that has many different names, so it's very difficult the way they surreptitiously inject it into various states, various districts, their curriculum, by how it's chosen. Okay, so but we do know that it is in America. That in New York, it's been in New York, it's been in California. I could get you a list of states that it has been discovered in, but this is definitely coming down the pipeline because it's part of these frameworks, the same frameworks that have the same book recommendations. So it's very connected.
If you would send that to my office, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our panel. We appreciate your time and testimony here today. Next, we have Brandy Howard, Amanda Price, and Mark Woodward. All right, we'll start right here. If you would introduce yourself for the record, you'll have 4 minutes, sir, for comments.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be here to speak to you. Thank you, everybody, for all going through this together. My name is Mark Woodward. I am a K through 12 music and drama teacher and husband and father to 6. I've lived here in Nashville for 21 years. I love my own kids. I love kids in general. I've coached baseball with the RBI League, reviving baseball in the inner city, as well as with Creve Hall baseball. I care about kids. I think, frankly, that it is absurd that I have to cancel my morning schedule and come and try to explain to our people's representatives why pornography and obscene materials should not be in schools. At the risk of repeating what has already been said, I just want to bring up, maybe echo something that maybe somebody said before me, but pornography, it causes powerful chemicals to be released in the brain. It's like a substance that can be very addictive. Would we leave heroin needles or meth sitting out in schools and say, let's just try this in a safe environment? When lady was reading earlier, reading those descriptions. You know, a representative said last week, you know, I don't want to read that stuff. I don't need to read it, and I don't want to read it either. I don't want to hear it. You know, and so, but we have to, in order to, as has been said, think critically about this subject. We need to know what we're talking about, and I think that there are, as has been said and alluded to, there are forces at work in this state that do not have our children's best health and well-being. They don't have that at heart. They're pushing an agenda that is trying to sexualize children, and it's not healthy for kids. It's not good for kids, and it's not that kids are these little innocent creatures that go through life and you know, they're just, you know, these pure, amazing things. I mean, if anyone has had kids, you know how smart they are. They're clever. They'll find things that you never thought they could find. I mean, it's and so it's not an issue of well, what about regulating this or regulating as you know, those are important things. But as a role of government. The government has a role to protect children from those things in the capacity that the children are in the custody of the government, which is in public schools all day long. And so, and I don't think that's unreasonable. I think that you know, people all across the political spectrum agree on that. People that I talk to who are Democrats, who are independents, who are Republicans, they all look at this stuff and they're like, no, I don't want my kids to be reading that. I had a very dear friend who his first experience with pornography was on the computers at his school. And he was able to go into the library and sit at a computer that faced the wall and just search for whatever he wanted to. And there was literature also that was found that you know, described these very explicit descriptions. And that type of material, like I said earlier, is addictive, and it does affect how you view, for instance, how a boy views women and girls.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Apologize. Your time is up.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
I can't get this to turn off. There we go. Thank you for your comments. Ma'am, if you would identify yourself for the record, you'll have 4 minutes.
My name is Amanda Price. Teenagers who grow up in single-parent homes are particularly at risk of pornography addiction. 1 out of every 4 students lives in a single-parent home. As a former widow and single mother of 5, I know firsthand that single parents need HB 1944 to pass more than most. A NSPCC Childline survey concluded that 1/10 of 12 to 13-year-olds fear they are addicted to pornography. As porn addiction rewires the brain, there is an increase in hypersexuality and a decrease in executive function. This would suggest that 1 in 10 minors are more reactive to sexually explicit material, or SEM, in schools and less able to sharpen critical thinking skills when SEM is included. Never mind the middle schoolers, how many adults have mastered critical thinking skills while they're horny? If it is true, according to reader response theory, that readers experience text vicariously through the characters in the story, then it is absolutely unacceptable that any student, especially those with history of trauma, would be allowed to vicariously experience, even by accident, graphic depictions of rape, incest, or pedophilic fantasies via books such as Out of Darkness, The Bluest Eyes, The Kite Runner, The Handmaid's Tale, My Friend Dahmer. Opposition to criminally obscene materials in schools should only be interpreted as political if it is listed as an official political party platform. What have we come to as a society that this should ever be necessary? As a school board representative stated that teachers and librarians don't have the time to read the books they place on the shelves and imply that they shouldn't be expected to, as it is too great. And then a student told my daughter that when they ask the librarian for a book under the sun, any book under the sun, it will be ordered without question. Meanwhile, I have been tasked with writing, submitting, and following up with up to 200 forms pursuant to Policy 4.403 with little to no guarantee any books will be removed. This is unconscionable. While I understand the need to actually read a text before considering age appropriateness, I do not understand why they have set up a procedure that rapidly funnels sexually explicit material into our school libraries without question, but then we begrudgingly reconsider those decisions at a snail's pace. Why not facilitate a state or national book rating system similar to movies to make up for the complete lack of vetting procedures? Parents who wish to opt their child into R-rated materials can sign a consent form via Skyward if they want to read the books. With the increase in an access to SEM via electronics, as well as an increase in single-parent unmarried homes, are schools even keeping up with the changing prurient interests of minors? Where is the data on this, and how is it being applied to avoid obscenity in library schools? Or is the Miller test only applied against concerned parents? Schools have disproportionately prioritized books over all other media. With consideration to other school policies in place for obscenity, many books simply recently covered in school libraries are patently offensive to prevailing community standards. Simply compare policies concerning obscenity in books with other policies that objectively list what is not permitted in student newspapers, student conduct, dress code, Chromebooks, movies, and music. In this day and age, it is disingenuous to argue that books with SEM have literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors without also considering the greater context of the porn epidemic afflicting minors in our society. This is why, with regard to the literary value of a book as cause to allow sexually explicit content, I would err on the side of 1 Corinthians 5:6, which says that a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am, please introduce yourself. You have 4 minutes.
I'm Brandy Howard, the mom of 2 children who have been avid readers, so this is very personal to me. I have appreciated our school and local librarians. Miss Price and Miss Boheeler would give me a list of recommendations for my kids because they read through books so quickly. They'd give me that list of recommendations. I would go check out those books and hand them to my kids. I never vetted those books because I trusted those librarians. I trusted that they were going to give my children safe, age-appropriate books or recommend those, especially if they came from a school library. Parents didn't know that they needed to look at this stuff. They assume that schools have already vetted the material. Like so many parents, and probably a lot of people here, I was shocked and disappointed to find out that's not true. These materials are not appropriately vetted. I've heard people say that HB 1944 isn't necessary because there's already a process in place to take care of this. There's no problem, just follow the process, right? I heard laughs, it's true. The 4.403 request for reconsideration process. That process was provided by the American Library Association. The ALA is a nonprofit organization that advocates and lobbies, political lobby, for the benefit of librarians and libraries. It is not a government agency or legislative body. This association created their Library Bill of Rights. They say school librarians resist all efforts by individuals or groups to define what is appropriate. They say that major barriers between students and resources include age, grade level, reading level restrictions, limiting access to electronic information. So that probably answers why they don't have appropriate filters on electronic devices at the library. They even say that requiring permission from parents or teachers is called a major barrier by the American Library Association. You can find it on their website. In the ALA's interpretations of the Library Bill of Rights, they further clarify their policies. They say that regarding access to library resources and services for minors, that library policies and procedures that effectively deny minors equal and equitable access to all resources available to other users violate their Library Bill of Rights. The American Library Association opposes all attempts to restrict access to material based on age. Clearly, they support free and open access to all information, regardless of whether or not it's age appropriate. The 4.403 process that they published is not an effective tool for addressing obscene materials in schools. That procedure does not provide criteria or guidance by which those requests for reconsideration will be evaluated. That's like trying to decide whether or not somebody was speeding before you ever set a speed limit. We need criteria and boundaries to be clarified. And putting that criteria in place is not banning books. Just like speed limits don't ban driving, putting an R rating on a movie does not ban that movie. Setting guidelines simply clarifies expectations and hopefully provides the opportunity to rebuild the trust that parents once had in their schools and their libraries. The obscenity law provides that criteria, and everyone, including libraries and schools, should be equally subject to that law. So I ask you, please vote yes for HB 1944. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're excused. Thank you. Next on our list, we have Sharon K. Edwards. Again, please excuse me if I don't get names right here. Lindsay Kimmery. Andrew Moranis. Kimberly Bradley. Diane Telgan. And Mahal Burr. We'll start down here on this end, and we'll work our way across. If you will, identify yourself for the record. You'll have 4 minutes.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Andrew Marinis. I've lived in Williamson County for 12 years and in Tennessee for 34. I'm a father of an 11-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. I'm an author of 4 books on sports and history for teens, and I'm here to speak today against HB 1944. I've met many of you before when you've honored the subject of one of my books, Perry Wallace, with various proclamations, and when I've also joined the Tennessee School Librarians for their Days on the Hill to meet with each of you about the value of school libraries. I've enjoyed those conversations, and I never saw anyone express any concerns about the character or morals of the librarians on those visits. So while I've been shocked by the demeaning portrayals of public school teachers and librarians in previous gatherings of this committee, I've been even more disappointed by both the figurative and literal applause and support for these baseless accusations. I think it's a straw man argument to say that books are leading to molestation or to addiction to pornography. We know by looking at any statistics that the most frequent abusers of children are family members, right? I'm also offended by the use of the Bible in these conversations. If you look at the news, you see plenty of cases of abuse perpetrated by members of the clergy. There was a recent story in the Houston Chronicle and San Antonio Express talking about 300 cases of clergy members accused of sexual crimes recently. Exposure to the Bible is not the answer here. I don't think it's any coincidence that this push to ban books and criminalize teachers and librarians is coming in response to the increase in the diversity of books published for young readers, increased diversity of subject matters and the authors themselves. Nor is it a coincidence that this is happening at the same time this legislature has gerrymandered away the voice of the people in Nashville and is attempting to usher in religious charter schools that teach dangerous lies about civil rights history. Talk about being on the wrong side of history. It's all a part of the same ugly Christian nationalist playbook. Some of you might dismiss my claims as partisan, but I would argue they only reflect traditional American values that are under assault by this so-called supermajority. If that's partisan, so be it. As Americans, we are wary of government intruding into our personal lives, including our bookshelves. As Americans, we value personal responsibility, including the responsibility to tell the truth, to act with reason, and not to make hysterical and unfounded claims such as schools promoting Pornhub. As Americans, we respect hardworking public servants in our communities, such as teachers, librarians, and principals. We don't sacrifice them to further a selfish political agenda. As Americans, we are deeply skeptical of attempts to ban books and even more skeptical of people who cherry-pick sentences in order to make false claims. Speakers before this committee have quoted passages from the Bible, so let me do the same. There she lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys and whose emission was like that of horses. So you long for the lewdness of your youth when in Egypt your bosom was caressed and your young breasts fondled. Would anyone argue that the Bible is a work of pornography? Certainly not, so let's not cherry pick. It accomplishes nothing. Instead, let's have qualified people judge books on their merits and their totality. That's exactly what we already do in Tennessee, and we already have systems in place for parents who wish to challenge a book. This law is unnecessary, and the conversation around it is nothing but a sideshow. Our school librarians do an amazing job curating their shelves with appropriate books. Libraries become a safe and welcoming place for our students where they can read for class or for enjoyment. School libraries are the furthest thing from a threat to students' well-being. In fact, they're one of the greatest assets we have. Just 2 years ago, the American Library Association named Tennessee their National Chapter of the Year. The same people as speaker who called child predators the other day, while many in this room nodded their heads. Come on, that is absurd. It's absurd to me that the American Library Association is labeled a sinister organization in the same body that's beholden to the NRA. What's more threatening to children, books or guns? In my experience as an author who has visited dozens of schools across Tennessee, books and libraries are the most important part of a child's education. Any attack on school libraries is not something any Tennessean should take lightly. Students
Thank
achieve
you.
more.
I'm sorry, your time is up. I'm sorry. Thank you. Ma'am, you'll have, if you will introduce yourself, you'll have 4 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Doggett. Thank you, leaders, for the opportunity. My name is Lindsay Kimmery, and I'm the past president of the Tennessee Association of School Librarians. I've been a librarian and teacher for over 20 years in the school districts of Williamson County and Metro Nashville Public Schools. I was raised in Tennessee public schools, and I'm a mother of 4 sons who've all been educated in our school systems. I'm here to share about the reconsideration policy known as 4.403 that exists in our school districts and how this is a solution we already have to address the concerns expressed in HB 1944. Furthermore, with the Age-Appropriate Materials Act of 2022, which passed recently, this will ensure that all districts in Tennessee have a reconsideration policy if they do not already. The objective of a reconsideration policy is for schools and districts to have a standard procedure to review and respond to concerns about school library materials. Despite careful selection of library resources and the qualifications of those involved in the selection process, objections to library resources that are deemed offensive or inappropriate may occur. This provides a way for any current parent, guardian, employee, or student of a school district to express an informal concern or formal request for reconsideration of a library resource. 4.403 acknowledges support for the principles of intellectual freedom inherent in First Amendment rights of students and references Supreme Court case of Island Trees Union Free School District versus PICO, which found that the removal of books from a school library may violate students' First Amendment rights if the removal is based on an unconstitutional motivation. We encourage parents to start at the school level. Talk with the librarian. Talk with the principal. In my 17 years as a school librarian, I learned that listening to parent concerns and working with parents only made my library program stronger. Anytime I received a concern from a parent, we were able to work together to best meet the needs of their child, and no further action was needed. However, if a parent is not satisfied, they may proceed with a formal request for reconsideration. The school librarian can provide the reconsideration form, which asks for the following information for the parent to provide: the title and author of the work, what brought the resource to their attention, if they have read the entire resource or reviewed certain sections, what concerns do they have about the resource, are there resources they suggest to provide additional information, or other viewpoints, and what action are they requesting the committee to consider. Following receipt of this completed form, an ad hoc committee is formed at the school level, which typically includes administrators, a librarian, language arts teachers, and community members. The committee reads the work in its entirety and reviews the information from the complainant. They consider the work for its overall purpose, authenticity, appropriateness, content, and reviews of the book. The committee has between 10 days and 2 weeks to reach a decision, and this is per book. If a parent is not satisfied and desires further action, they may appeal to the board, and the same process is repeated, but the board's decision is final. This process is lengthy because we are examining a resource in conjunction with our students' First Amendment rights, and so that we are not opening ourselves up for First Amendment violation lawsuits. So we already have a process in place for addressing these concerns, and the Age Appropriate Materials Act ensures this process exists. School librarians are always here to work with parents. We welcome this partnership. It's a better use of your time to support the Age Appropriate Materials Act and the State School Library Coordinator Bill. Please vote no to 1944. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am, introduce yourself for the record. You'll have 4 minutes.
Hi, thank you so much. I am Sharon Edwards. I am current president of the Tennessee Library Association, and I just want to thank y'all so much for your time today. I think it's a beautiful thing that everybody comes here and y'all sat here and listened to all of this. Thank you. This is what democracy looks like, so I'm very excited to be here. I will be speaking against HB 1944 on behalf of the Tennessee Library Association, and I'm going to have 3 points. My first point is redundancy. The bill's own fiscal note states that Tennessee's harmful to minors law, which incidentally does not have an educational exception, already makes the provision of obscenity to minors illegal. And 1944's fiscal note also implies that obscenity isn't an issue at all in school libraries, because the fiscal note says, quote, "It is reasonably assumed LEAs are currently prohibiting materials considered harmful to minors from being available to students in school libraries." The reason the fiscal note can be so sure about this statement is because Tennessee Code defines obscenity with the Miller test. And if you're unclear what the Miller test is, it's in the fiscal note as well. And remember, for an item to be considered obscene, it has to pass all 3 conditions of the Miller test. The fiscal note to this bill also gives the number of harmful to minors convictions over the past decade, and that number is 2.5. So if the intent behind HB 1944 is to keep obscenity out of the hands of minors, then our current Tennessee Code and the sound professional judgment of our school libraries and school boards are already doing this. My second point is a financial impact. The fiscal note only accounts for the cost of convictions in it. And this on the state and municipality budgets. And as I mentioned before, it says that LEAs are not providing obscenity, and there's only been 2.5 convictions in the past decade. So the fiscal note reasonably says that there is no significant change in revenue or expenditures from convictions. But there's something I think the fiscal note kind of leaves out, and it's First Amendment lawsuits, as Lindsay has just mentioned. Because the books being challenged in school libraries and classrooms today do not pass the Miller test, and they are not defined as obscene. These books are freely available to all ages at Walmart and Amazon and any other bookstore, and if they were defined as obscene, they would not be. This would not be the case. So when the books are removed from schools, it opens our schools up to First Amendment lawsuits that they cannot afford, and I'm not speculating. This is already happening. The ACLU is looking into McMinn County right now. They issued a press release on it. And in Bedford County schools, at 2 schools, 2 theater performances were canceled because of this. And I don't think the ACLU knows about that, but if they did, what would happen there? I mean, I was born and raised in Bedford County. I live in Lincoln County now, but I know they don't have the money to fight this. So my third point is government overreach based on the amendment. The amendment establishes a process statewide for book challenges. And this is a gross overreach of state government, and it's nothing less than the micromanaging of school boards, teachers, superintendents, principals, and school librarians. I just want to be clear on 3 things. The first is parents already have a right to examine curriculum and request alternative instruction. The second thing is school districts already have processes and policies in place for book challenges and removals, and school libraries already have their catalogs online. So this amendment upends every decision made by local municipalities, and I can't help but wonder what the local county commissions would think about the state coming in and telling them that their work isn't good enough, or it's not, telling them what to do. So ultimately, I think this entire discussion, and I've heard points today that even point to this, I think it points to the fact that we need a state school library coordinator. If something comes up about public libraries, well, y'all can just go to Secretary Hargett, and he goes to Chuck at the TSLA, and he gets with the regional directors, and they get with the libraries in their district. There's an ecosystem. There's an organization in place already. I couldn't help but laugh last week when one of the speakers was like, well, let's send an email to all the libraries. Do you know there's no way to even do that?
Ma'am, I'm sorry, your 4 minutes are up. I do
All right, thank you.
apologize. Thank you. You have 4 minutes. If you would, please identify yourself on the record.
Start by saying I do not have COVID. I have asthma that's exacerbated by someone's perfume.
Okay. Would you?
Mask out of, sorry.
You're fine.
Okay, so some
Proceed.
people have expressed concern about the coughing. It's asthma due to someone's perfume, but I will keep my mask on in an abundance of caution. My name is Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. I've lived in Bristol, Tennessee for 25 years. My 2 children are graduates of Bristol's Tennessee High. I'm also a #1 New York Times bestselling author of children's books, a 2-time Newbery Honor Award winner, and winner of the 2018 Volunteer State Book Award for the book that middle school students in Tennessee called their favorite, voted on as their favorite. I'm also the founder of Appalachian Literacy Initiative, which is a nonprofit that will give over 30,000 free books to low-income Appalachian school children this school year. I would like to address the idea that if a book is banned from a school library, students who wish to read it can easily find it elsewhere. Some students can, but many cannot. For a great many Tennessee school children, their school and classroom libraries provide their only access to books. Please consider the following from the 2021 State of the Child report by the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. 47%, nearly half, of Tennessee public school students receive free lunch. Their families often do not have money to spare to buy their children books after paying for basic needs. 1 in 12 public school students 1 in 12 Tennessee public school students do not receive internet in their homes. 1 in 5 lack either internet or a device that connects online. They cannot access books online. Tennessee's public libraries are excellent, but many factors limit low-income children from making use of them. Around 2% of Tennessee public school students, 20,000, are homeless in any given year. People without permanent addresses cannot get library cards. Around 1% of our public school students are in foster care, and kids in foster care usually can't get library cards. In our rural communities, transportation is often a problem. Many of the schools served by Appalachian Literacy Initiative are over half an hour's drive from the nearest public library. So when these frivolous book bannings occur, they are hurting the most vulnerable students in our state, the ones that need access to school libraries and school books in order to succeed. But there's another aspect to consider. Sometimes the book that one parent might consider inappropriate for their own child is the same book that will dramatically improve another child's life. My 2021 Newbery Honor-winning novel is called Fighting Words. It is the first book written specifically for grades 5 through 8 that tackles sexual assault and its effects head-on. I wrote it extremely carefully with expert opinion from child trauma specialists, so the book would be as non-traumatic to readers as possible while still being honest about the reality that far too many of our children face. According to the United States Department of Justice, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys, that's to say 1 in 5 children, 20%, in the United States are sexually assaulted. Child sexual assault victims often feel as though they are to blame for what happened to them. My novel assures them that they are not, and arms them with an example of how to speak up and end abuse. And it has done so. I've already received mail from young readers who told me that the story I wrote gave them the courage to speak up to a trusted adult or parent and end the abuse they were enduring. You cannot tell from looking around an elementary classroom which children might need fighting words, but the book should be available to those that look for it. And the same can be said for every school in public libraries. I would also like to add that we do have gay and transgender children in Tennessee public schools. Their existence or the existence of gay or transgender parents is not pornography. School librarians.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, your 4 minutes are up.
Thank you.
Thank you. You'll have 4 minutes to identify yourself for the record, and then you make comments.
Thank you. My name is Diane Telgen. I live in Nashville, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak against HB 1944. I'm an author of children's books and a member of the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. Although today I'm speaking only for myself, I have many colleagues who could not attend today because they're in schools today reading to children from their books. Naturally, I find the idea of restricting children's access to books and potentially punishing librarians and educators for giving books to children extremely alarming. I have two main questions for this committee to consider. First, I'm wondering why this bill is necessary at all. Tennessee schools already have policies in place that allow parents to challenge materials that they feel are inappropriate for their children. Going after educators and charging them with obscenity seems like overkill when there are other avenues available to protest a particular item in the library. If current policies aren't serving parents satisfactorily, how does escalating in this fashion solve the problem? Because I can certainly see some new problems it will cause. First Amendment lawsuits that our school systems will have to litigate with their already limited resources, time and money that would be better spent educating children. Second, I'm also wondering exactly who gets to determine which materials are deemed offensive pornography. Since people supporting this bill have been excerpting works they find offensive and pornographic, I wanted to call your attention to a particular work they have overlooked that could be added to your list. It has passages that include the following inappropriate material: the use of sex toys, bestiality involving horses and donkeys, depictions of oral and anal sex, sisters drugging their own father so they can have sex with him, killing a whole town, but saving the girl children for sexual slavery, many scenes of gang rape and sexual violence, including incest. Now, I could recite chapter and verse for you, but I don't think it is necessary. I've put footnotes in the written version of this statement, and most people familiar with the Christian Bible know that it contains scenes of sex and violence. Now, am I suggesting that we ban the Bible from libraries or that we levy obscenity charges against any adult who provides one to a child? No, and for one important reason: context matters. I understand that for Christians, the ultimate message of the Bible is that Jesus died to redeem humanity's sins. If you remove all of these violent, sexually explicit elements from the Bible because they're potentially offensive or pornographic, where is the sin from which Jesus will save us? Context matters. So if I turn to one of the, quote, offensive pornographic books cited by some of the people supporting this bill, Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. It's mainly the story of a missing girl, but it also contains descriptions of sexual acts, along with foul language, which many have cited as offensive and inappropriate. But I've read the entire book, so I understand the context. It contains a critique of how our society sexualizes young women, and especially young women of color. It shows how as soon as a young girl develops a womanly figure, be she 15 or 13 or even 10, there are men who will comment on her body. There will men who will try and engage in sexual activity with her. So I ask you, how can you indict the sexualization of girls if you can't portray what it looks like, even if it's ugly and offensive? And maybe your girls live in a place where no man will comment on their bodies or target them sexually until they turn 18. And if they're that fortunate, this book might not be for them. But there are other girls out there who aren't so protected, who might need to recognize a sexual predator and might need the story that shows how they can survive in the kind of a world where a 13-year-old girl can go missing for a year without anyone noticing. And that's the context of this book.
Thank you. You'll have 4 minutes to introduce yourself for the record, and you'll have 4 minutes to speak.
Hello, my name is Mahal Burr, and I'm speaking as a former teacher and a current director of a youth nonprofit. In my work with youth as a teacher and a director of a youth nonprofit, I have always emphasized the importance of building a stronger, more just and loving world. The key to creating this world is learning from our past, which includes so much good as well as the realities of our history with genocide, enslavement, forced sterilization, and so much more. And being able to see choices that were made, reflect on those choices, and choose carefully in future actions. This is why I see these history books that some may describe as violent or inappropriate as absolutely necessary. In addition to making sure mistakes aren't repeated from the past, books can be a powerful tool and catalyst to talk about issues that directly affect youth today. The books I was exposed to in high school gave me the courage to speak up against my own experience with sexual violence and helped me to process that journey and realize I'm not alone. Books like Speak, The Bluest Eye, When the Caged Bird Sings, and now I want to read Fighting Words over there, and many others became places for me to see others find their voice through hardship, and for me to get the courage to speak up and advocate for myself. I also worked for about 5 years to help build a youth-led group called Memphis Against Sexual Harassment and Assault. And in that group, they shared and gathered a list of books that helped them process being a survivor of abuse, many of which could be on this censored book list. I think that the key to a better world requires books that tell the good and the bad of our history and make sure that we are not hiding stories and voices that youth may connect to and may need in their lives. In preparation for this meeting, I watched all the testimonies from last week and took a look at the website shared and read the very troubling excerpts from the books. As a survivor, my heart was with everyone who shared for this bill. As parents and as people, I am sure, as I'm sure it was with you all. I had to imagine they were survivors, or they knew survivors, and were speaking from a space of deep love and protection. While I understand this fear, as stated previously, I do not see this bill as the answer to protecting our students. I wanted to end by sharing what the high school age youth I have worked with have named would truly support them as people and make them feel safer in our schools. In my work with high school age survivors, what has come up again and again as a true solution to breaking the silence and stigma around sexual violence. The students have actually called for schools to teach about sexual harassment, consent, and how to advocate for themselves. I think this is how we best protect our students. I also wanted to share a solution that was suggested by a youth I worked with within the justice system who has committed sexual assault. When asked the question of what does he think our community could do to stop people with sexual disorders like him from acting on those impulses, he named that he wished he had been educated about what he was feeling in schools and had the chance to learn what he could have done to get help for him before he did anything. He named the importance of teaching about mental health and having real conversations about what to do if you are mentally unhealthy. With all that said, I know youth are coming to speak about this bill next week, and I would implore you to listen to them, not only about why they oppose this bill, but also about what solutions you all as representatives could do to make our schools safer and more healthy for them.
Thank you very much for your comments. I have 2 members on the list to ask questions very briefly. Representative Hardaway, brief comment.
Thank you, Chairman. And first, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here. This is a representative democracy, and we represent by our votes what you think, what your desires are. And if you don't get involved, then we do what we want to do. Okay? It's like in a relationship. We go as far as you let us go. All right. I was a librarian in school, from elementary school on through work study in college. So I share the sense of well, I'll just say I'm offended, as you are, when librarians are compared to sex predators and your actions are compared to sex trafficking. And if anyone doubts this, then go back and look at the testimony from last week. But I will tell, and I could show you some of my text messages this morning, okay? But I will end, Mr. Chairman, by simply saying that take this with you. I got it from my daddy. You may often be outnumbered, but never be outmanned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Sexton, briefly.
And I'll take the opposite side of the view of that. I certainly do not appreciate the fact that you're allowing pornography in. And I noticed that none of you all read from any of those books. You read from the Bible, and most of you read from the Bible, and you read from the New Living Version, which is a very graphic version. I don't use that. The King James Version does not use that language, and I want you to know that. And so if you're so proud of the work that you're putting in these libraries, why didn't you come here with the literary and read it and explain how great that it is? I'm appalled at the fact that you treat me and those of us that don't agree with you as if we're illiterate and an elitist. You act like an elitist. As
You
if I
invited a
don't
celebrity
agree
last
with
week that
you.
compared people
You
with
have to
librarians
address the
to
chairman.
molesters.
You have to address the chairman.
So, let's get back on, let's stay on the bill here. We're making brief comments, and then we're going back into session.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't appreciate what's going into our libraries. It's not good for our children, and shame on you for putting it there.
All right. All right, we're going to go back into session. We're back into session now. Chairman Curcio, you have a brief comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate everyone's passion. I know we've been at this for 2 weeks, and I think we're getting near the end. I just wanted to briefly talk about, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that there's not a single member of the General Assembly that thinks children should have access to pornography. We absolutely all wholeheartedly believe that. But I'm reminded of when I was running for office the first time. I represent a pretty rural community, and I remember knocking on a door in Murray County, had an old farmer come to the door, and he said, "So you want to go to Nashville, huh, boy?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." I said, I think I'd do you a good job. He said, "Well, that's fine." He said, "But when you get there, make sure that you're a workhorse and not a show horse." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" He said, "Well, don't do all that huffing and puffing, actually get something done." And so as I read through this, I want to explain this because I think it's important. We all agree. Everybody in this room agrees, whether you know that or not. But what House Bill 1944 does is it violates the Constitution because it is facially unconstitutional, because the court has opined that if we limit that exception to the obscenity statute, the bill will be facially unconstitutional. And so when this passes and when it becomes law, it will immediately be enjoined, and it won't do what we all want it to do, which is exactly why there is another bill that gets at what we're all concerned about. I'm a father of 3 children, which is age appropriateness. There is a bill that does that does not violate the Constitution. And so for that reason, I cannot support this bill. I absolutely support your effort. I completely agree that allowing children to have access to pornography is abhorrent. But I want to make sure that I'm a workhorse and not a show horse. I want to pass a bill that's going to stop it. This won't stop it. Thank you.
Representative Spicky.
Members of this committee, I happen to be carrying both those bills. And I know that both these bills do different things. The other bill that the chairman's referencing, he's somewhat right on. It does different things to provide things that are transparent, things that are available to parents, but it doesn't do what 1944 does. 1944 is not unconstitutional. He's 100% wrong. I've had highest legal minds look at this. I've had legal minds look at this to say, we already have the ability through the Miller test to do this. And in the bill, it sets up the skeletal process of how not a librarian, but a school board, the elected representatives of those individual counties in the state of Tennessee and those districts, they are the ones who will employ the Miller test. They are the ones who will look at community standards. They are the ones who will be reasonable and make those decisions, which are constitutional. That's what this does. And it creates that process that we've heard from the last few people that testified. They talked about, well, there's already a process to keep it out of there. Mr. Chairman, there's 70 books that are already in our classrooms that librarians allowed in. 70 books. There should be recourse with the parents of this state for their children to ask those books to be evaluated by their duly elected representatives, not a librarian. That's what we're asking to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Leader Lamberth is next on my list.
Move previous question.
Previous question has been called. Any objection? Seeing none, we're now voting on sending House Bill 1944 as amended on the full criminal. Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Representative Beck?
No.
Curcio?
No.
Farmer?
Yes.
Griffey?
Aye.
Hardaway?
No.
Howell?
Yes.
Lamberth?
Yes.
Moody? Yes. Russell? Sexton? Yes. Chairman Doggett?
Yes.
Chairman Doggett, you have 7 ayes, 3 noes.
The ayes prevail. Bill moves on to full criminal. Members, we still have other items on the calendar. All items not taken up today will be rolled to the next week's calendar. We will be adjourned.